When it comes to the weapons of Fallout, something I see being argued about time and time again is the design of the assault rifle. It seems that to be a proper Fallout fan, it's important to establish where you stand on the debate around whether or not the old designs are better than the new. And so today, I firmly plant my flag, letting you all know that my own opinion is... I don't care. People can argue as much as they like about the super technical details of the design of a weapon, whether the stock is the right colour or the barrel the correct thickness, but to me, it just doesn't matter all that much. I'm not interested in the weapons of Fallout being super accurate to how gun nuts think they should be. What I care about is that the game is fun. So that's exactly what this video about the weapons and armour I'd want in the perfect Fallout game will focus on. If you care deeply about the normal design discussion, then I'm afraid this video won't be catering to your needs. Instead, I really just want to talk about things in terms of gameplay, and leave the more aesthetic design details for others to discuss. As just mentioned, this video is a part of my Fallout Raiders of New York series, a weekly run of YouTube videos in which I am describing my idea for what I'd like the next Fallout game to be. Go check out the previous episodes if you've not seen them yet and you want more of an idea of the overall project. For today, we're adding to the series by talking a little about the equipment you'd gather in-game, mainly focusing around weapons and armour. The Fallout franchise has a crazy amount of equipment across all the different entries, and if I went over every past item and say which I'd want in my game, we'd be in here forever. Instead, I'm going to very quickly just let you all know that I would ideally bring back as many old bits of gear as possible. I see variety as a positive, and the more choices we have when it comes to weapons and armour, the better. Rather than go on about each and every item we've seen before, I'm instead going to introduce you to some new items I'd want added to the world of Fallout, talk about a few features from past games I want to expand upon, and do my standard rant on the whole legendaries versus uniques thing. Let's start with the most fun part, the new gear. Something which Fallout 4 added to the franchise was pipe weapons. Stuff like this, where it's clear that Wastelanders have crafted together a makeshift firearm out of old junk. I love this as an idea and want to expand it further, in order to keep the whole junk kind of aesthetic and lore, but without making them just the lowest tier equipment. To that end, I present to you the Sawblade Launcher. The one you're seeing on screen comes from Far Cry New Dawn, but the general idea has been in a fair few games now. The basic concept is that you have a saw blade and launch it towards your enemy. Beautifully simple, yet deadly. As well as having some brand new weapons, I'd also want to start attaching weapons to armour. While many of you associate power armor with the Fallout franchise, for me the first thing that comes to mind is this, the suits that Space Marines wear in the world of Warhammer 40,000. These suits not only provide huge amounts of protection, like the ones in the world of Fallout, but some even come with weapon systems built in order to purge any who do not worship the Emperor. I'd want my Fallout game to follow suit, adding in some heavy weapon integration options to power armor, similar to how Fallout 4 let you mod unarmed damage items onto the arms, but by taking this a step further, we could also get underhand flamer attachments, shoulder-mounted rockets, and helmet lasers. But it doesn't have to be purely offensive capabilities. I'd also like to see items which bridge the gap between attack and defense. Heavy spiked gauntlets could increase your armor rating while also dealing additional damage on melee and unarmed attacks. This also ties into how I'd want to modify the modification system that was introduced in Fallout 4. Currently it's pretty straightforward. The further down you go on the list, the better the mod is. That's fine, but it doesn't really lead to much in the way of choice making for your weapons. You just always go for whatever the best mod you can afford is. I'd instead want to make it so that the different mods for each section of a weapon provide a different bonus. For example, a heavy stock could reduce recoil and increase bash damage, while a light stock could make you aim down sight faster and improve movement speed while scoped up. The key is to ensure the player gets a real decision to make when modding out the weapon, so that they can make it work the way they want it to. One big element in all this as well will be damage types. Fallout has several different types of damage you can inflict, but honestly, who amongst us really pays much attention to that? Besides avoiding radiation damage because it sucks against most creatures, every other damage type is viewed almost equally. Technically some enemies are weaker to ballistic damage and others may be vulnerable to energy instead, but it's always been such a minor difference that there's not much of a reason to switch weapons to the better damage type. Pretty simple change for my game would just be to make the resistances more pronounced. This would help to promote switching weapons and damage types a bit more, as you might be dealing pretty lackluster ballistic damage against some enemies, but by switching to energy, you could shred their health bar. To this extent though, I'd also make it so you could somewhat mod the damage type of your weapons. Just because you're a character who's spec'd into the gun skill doesn't mean you're exclusively dealing ballistic damage. Plasma-infused barrels could add some energy-based damage to your rifle, and poison-soaked magazines could make your bullets deal some nasty damage over time. This would make it so that you could spend your junk on modding out one weapon to deal a multitude of damage types and be a bit of a jack of all trades, or do a little light modding to multiple weapons, so that they're each good for situational reasons. With all these fancy modding options, I wouldn't want to go down the Fallout 4 route where every option is visible to you straight away, and it's only perks that lock crafting options. Instead, I'd go down the Fallout 76 path and use plans. For those not familiar, in 76 you pick up plans throughout the game, and reading them unlocks new crafting options, be it learning how to make an entire weapon, just a mod for it, or maybe even some camp-based items. I really like this system and think it would work even better in a single player game, as there's less need to throw plans at the player for random repeatable events, and more quest-based locations that you can place high tier plans in, helping to give the player a greater sense of reward for exploring the environment or beating parts of the game. I have one final point to make about the whole crafting style systems in the game, and that's weapon condition. I mentioned the term repair in a previous video, and I want to set some worries aside on that. While I do want weapons and armour to have a condition bar, I don't want them to break like they often have, nor do I want them to constantly need to be fixed up in order to deal maximum damage. Instead, I would want the top 50% of the condition bar to make the weapon work perfectly, no issues whatsoever. Once you drop below 50% condition, the item suffers some very minor debuffs. Maybe a point of resistance is lost for armour, guns could become a little less accurate, and melee weapons could swing a little slower. I wouldn't want any of these debuffs to be major, just some very mild nerfs to showcase the gear being rough around the edges. Drop below 10% condition, and that's when things get really noticeable. Reloads could get jammed, taking extra time, chunks of armour could have been destroyed, leaving weak points on you, and just generally your gear would be a fair sight worse. But to fix it up, you just need to find a workbench, have a little junk, and patch things up. I'd want it to be the case where repairing your gear is a good thing to do, but that it wouldn't need to happen often, and it shouldn't be constantly hampering the player. Just occasionally giving the panic moment where you've been shooting the same gun for hours of playtime, and then it jams, adding to the tension of the fight. Okay, enough on that, just two more things I want to talk about, both of which are personal peeves I have with the modern Fallout games. First of which is the legendary system. I have spoken time and time again about how I don't like the legendary system on this channel, so I won't go into detail here. Instead, I'll just say that I really don't like how random it is. So instead, I go for the unique system that we saw in Fallout 3 and New Vegas. This is pretty simple, where there's just a single better version of every weapon and armour piece somewhere in the game. This is something that I've already shown a fair bit of in my various faction videos, with unique items available for joining or destroying the different factions. I feel like I should say more here, but there's really nothing else to say. Just have better cool versions of the standard gear as one-off uniques for players to collect. The other peeve I have is with sniping. Snipers in Fallout suck. They don't have the range, the damage, or the impact to them. I've played plenty of sniper-based games, and they show just how in-depth you can get with the mechanics of these weapons. Fallout doesn't need to have you measuring the wind, factoring the Coriolis effect, or technical stuff like that, but it does need to make it so the damage doesn't drop off so much at long range with a sniper. The whole thing about them is that they're lethal at a distance, but the Fallout games have been steadily making distance combat worse and worse, and I don't know why. Guns don't suddenly stop dealing damage because the target is more than 10 foot away. Keep the damage high over long distances, and instead just make it so spread can increase at range, so distant shots are less likely to hit, but still actually deal damage when they do. Additionally, the render distance needs to be long enough that modding a long scope onto your weapon lets you see distant enemies, instead of just letting you see textures that haven't loaded in yet. Alright, that was me getting a little worked up there, so I think I should call it here. If you've got any questions or ideas, then leave them in the comments. I'm planning on ending this series soon, so there shouldn't be too many more episodes coming, but I hope you'll all stick around for the final stages of this series. As always, thanks for watching. Sarge out.